I'm here with Kate Findlay, and we're here to talk about her phenomenal work. Kate, I just love the images that you're working with. Can you tell us about your inspiration?
Yes, indeed. I saw some photos in a newspaper in 2008, and I thought they were so amazing I had to find out more. And that's how I really found out about the Large Hadron Collider. And found some fantastic images on their website at Cern. And from there, it just inspired me for the next 4 years to produce a body of work, because I absolutely love the starting point, and I just think it's the most amazing machine.
Well, I think you had an amazing amount of foresight, because Hadron Collider images and artwork right now are really all the rage, aren't they?
I think they are, actually. It's very topical, as they've just discovered the Higgs boson.
Yes, exactly. Good. Well, let's talk about this quilt right here behind us.
Okay. This is called Atomic, and it was inspired by a part of the Hadron Collider called a pixel barrel. But also, I was interested in the whole idea of scale. So what I was trying to achieve was to get the feeling of the huge scale of the machine, but at the same time thinking about what they're doing with the machine, which is splitting atoms that you can't even see. So it's got a two parts to it. So the scale of the machine, and then actually part of a chromium atom, and the construction of the atom is part of the quilt as well.
That's amazing. I love hearing quilters talk like that. So one of the things that strikes me when I look at your work is I just feel like, how did she do that? Can you tell us about the fabrics and the techniques that you've used in this piece?
Yes, indeed. This is actually much more applique rather than piecing, but I've used a lot of different techniques, including screen printing, which was a first for me on this one. And it's actually to do with a physicist called Roger Feynman, and he did these Feynman diagrams. And so I've screen printed the Feynman diagrams into the outside of the quilt. And I very nearly called it Homage to Feynman, because he was such an important physicist in the 20th century. But actually I've called it the Alice Adventure, because it comes from Alice, which is part of the Hadron Collider, and one section. A lot of it's called Atlas, but there's also a section called Alice, and so that's where this came from. But the fabrics, I've used a lot of shiny fabrics, which are difficult to use because they're often very stretchy. They could be dancewear fabrics and things like that, but I've just gone for things with sparkle and interesting effects on them. But I've then tended to use a lot of Bonder web to try and keep them flat when I'm working, so because otherwise they are very difficult to work with.
So I'm seeing holographic foil fabrics, is that right?
Yes, indeed you are. Yes, it's all fabric, but it's just, just a big variety, and mostly just then bonded down and then stitched on top, with an applique style technique.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I love when we use the words physicist and quilter in the same sentence. So Kate, at this show, and really at all shows, I've always got my eye out for three-dimensional techniques, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the fabrics and the techniques that you've used in this piece.
Okay, this one's called Does the Dark Matter, which is a bit of a play on words. So partly because I've used quite a lot of dark colours, but it is also about dark matter, and again about the scale of the Hadron Collider and the minuscule atoms. So what I was trying to do here was to try and get a much more three-dimensional look into the whole piece. So I've used proper piecing, and what I've had to do is construct it in sections like that, which was quite complicated. I actually started by pinning it up on my design board and getting very confused actually about which triangle was on the top and underneath and everything. It was quite complicated actually. But with that I've used a huge amount of different fabrics because I wanted different textures in it. So I've got shiny fabrics, satin, silks, synthetics, as well as just dyed cottons. But yes, it's much more about trying to get a three-dimensional quality. And the centre section is actually literally card with bonded fabrics onto it, and then sort of sewn on from underneath to hold it in place.
Very successfully.
Thank you.
So I hear that you're a teacher. Could you tell us a little bit about what you teach?
Yes, indeed. I teach art and I do teach textiles. I teach little children now up to the age of 11, but I really enjoy bringing the textiles into what we do. And I do take my pieces in and show them to see what their reaction is as well. So.
I bet. Well, these pieces behind us, I would think there are some of their favorites. Some of the details are really a lot of fun. Can you tell us about some of the techniques of these?
Yes, indeed. These were some of the earlier pieces I made because I found it better to to work on a small scale and get through more ideas, really. And at then I was not so worried about trying to make quilts, but more using textiles in really quite a creative way. So they've got all sorts of techniques in, and often they're fabric bonded onto card. I've used wire, I've used wood, I've used architectural foam board. That's what I call it. It might not be the correct term, but it's a sort of thick card to give more depth to the pieces. So yeah, anything that seems appropriate I will use in the work.
I really appreciate that you are breaking the rules to be so creative. That's great.
Well, certainly, I suppose in a way it's quite useful not having come from a quilting background, because I don't necessarily know what the rules are, so I will then just use a technique if it seems to work. And recently I've started using fibre optics as well for that reason, because I think that's got a lot of interesting possibilities.
Oh, that's great. Well, you know what I'd love to do is take a look at your notebook.
Yes.
And talk about some of your ideas and your process.
Lovely. Yes, indeed.
So, I am really fascinated with your notebook, and I think every artist knows that they should keep a book like this, but not all do. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your process.
Yes, indeed. I was trained when I did my degree to keep a sketchbook, and I've always found it really useful, actually, because it's just a great way of recording your ideas, and anything that just comes to you in the middle of the night, jot it down, and then you might not use it straight away, but you are going to come back to it at some point. So that's why it's always been important to me. I use a real mixture of techniques. I like to put little samples in, little doodles, written bits and pieces, brainstorms, whatever's appropriate, really. And I'm not too precious about it, but yeah, at the same time I quite like making a nice layout as well, and it's just something that I enjoy visually going back through, and it does spark off more ideas.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just fascinated by the photos and what you've done with these. And just show us a few of these pages and tell us a little bit about it.
This was the inspiration for a piece called Breakthrough, which I did with contemporary quilt. And again, it was one of my first proper pieced quilts, actually. So again, I wanted to get it right and really experiment with the fabrics. But again, I was using fabrics that were a bit unusual, so I was using some satin silks in this. And also in the centre, I actually used a metal ring, a hoop, which then had a piece of metal scrim underneath it, and that was actually significant because that was saying the scientists hadn't had their breakthrough with that part of the Hadron Collider at that point, so it was obscured. So I had a bit of fun with that, actually. So yes, trying out all sorts of techniques. Here I've got my initial ideas for Does the Dark Matter, the piece we looked at earlier. Again, a combination of thoughts, coming together, some of the photos that were inspiring that. So again, a mixture of, any bits and pieces that have caught my eye or I might have read about or come across in magazines. It all gets in there really in some form or another, as well as the actual samples, and sometimes little notes saying what the fabrics were that I found in case I need to source some more of that fabric. But it could be a whole mixture. Some of the physics behind it, just so I know that what I'm talking about is correct. So it all goes in there in some form or another. So it's just a useful record to me as much as anything. So whole mixture of bits and pieces.
Oh, and all the fabric swatches?
Indeed. Yes, this was all the fabric for Does the Dark Matter. I sometimes put in photos of the piece in progress as well, because I think that's quite interesting, actually.
Very interesting.
Yes, yeah.
Well, Kate, I'd like to thank you for taking time from your busy show to visit with us, and I know that all of our eQuilter customers are really going to enjoy seeing this.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.